Baruch Shema Vayolam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Omer V'Oseh, Baruch Gozeh U'Mekayim, Baruch Oseh V'Reshit, Baruch Merachem Al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem Al Habriot, Baruch Meshalem Sachatov L'Reav, Baruch Mavir Afela U'Mevi Ora, Baruch HaChailad V'Kayam LaNetzach, Baruch Shein Lefanav Avla, V'lo Shicha, V'lo Masof Anim, V'lo Mikach Shochad, Tzadik Hu B'chol Derachav, V'chasid B'chol Maasav, Baruch Podeh U'Matzil, Baruch HaManchil Menucha, Le'amo Yisrael B'yom Shabbat Kodesh, Baruch Hu, Uvaruch Shemo, Uvaruch Zichro Le'ol Me'ad. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamelech hagadol v'hakadosh av harachaman, me'ulal b'fi amo, mishubach mufahal b'lshon kol chasidav v'avadav, ובשירי דוד עבדך נהלל לך אדוני אלוהינו, בשבחות וזמרות נהודך נגדלך, נפארך ונמליכך, ונזכיר שמך מלכנו אלוהינו, יחיד כעולמים, משובח ומפואר שמו עד עד, ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מהולל בתשבחות. And having promised God that we will praise with psalms, that's what we're going to do, beginning with Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, the psalm to sing on Shabbat day.
Tov lehodot l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, עלי עשור ועלי נבל, עלי היגיון בכינור, כי שימחתני אדוני בפועלך, במעשה ידיך ארני.
מה גדלו מעשיך אדוני, מאוד עמקו מחשבותיך, איש בעל לא ידע, וכסיל לא יבין את זאת. בפרח רשעים כמו עשב, ויציתו כל פועלי אבן, להישמדם עדי עד. ואתה מרום לעולם אדוני, כי הנה אויביך אדוני, כי הנה אויביך יאבדו, יתפרדו כל פועלי אבן. ותרם קרן קני בלותי בשמן רענן, ותבט עיני בשורי, בקמים עליים רעים, תשמענה אוזני.
צדיק אתה מה יברח, לארץ הלבנון יזכה.
having the joy of being able to hear one another, we turn to page 179 to sing our second psalm for this morning, Psalm 121.
Adonai Silecha, Ayad Yeminecha, Yom HaShemesh Lo Yakecha, V'yareach B'layla. Adonai Yishmorcha, Mikora Yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai Yishmor setecha uroecha me'ata ve'ad olam.
And on page 199. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen v'Amen. Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohei Yisrael, Osei Niflaot Levado, Uvaruch Shem Kvodo Leolam, V'yamalech Kvodo et Kol Haaretz. Amen v'Amen.
Nishmat kochai, devarech et shimcha.
Baladecha in lanu melech, go'el Moshiach, podem atzil v'onem rachem. V'chol eit tzara v'tzuka, in lanu melech ozev somech zulatecha. Elohei harishonim v'ha'achronim, Eloah kol briot, Adon kol toladot, hamhulal b'chol hatishbachot, hamnaheg olamo b'chesed v'riotav b'rachamim, v'Adonai lo yanum v'lo yishan, hamorei yeshenim v'hamikitz nedamim, Mechayim eitim rofei cholim, pokeach ivrim v'zokef kefufim, lecha levalecha, anachnu modim. And in the middle of page 203. Shochen ad marom v'kadosh shemo V'chatuv ranenu tzadikim Adonai la yesharim nava tehila befi yesharim titromam Uvedivrei tzadikim titbarach uvilshon chasidim titkadash uvakerev kadoshim titalam. And we invite you to join with us in standing for Yishtabach on page 204. Yishtabach Shimcha Le'ad Malkeinu, Ha'el HaMelech HaGadol HaKadosh, B'shamayim u'ba'aretz, Ki lecha na'eh Adonai Eloheinu, V'Elohei Avoteinu le'olam va'ed. Shir u'shvacha, Kedusha u'malchut, Barachot v'hodahot, L'shimcha hagadol v'hakadosh, U'me'olam v'yad olam atzahel, Baruch atah Adonai, Borei chol ha'neshamot, Ribon kol ha'ma'asim, Habocheh b'shirei zimra, Melechei ha'olamim.
Yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, lai, lai. Yai, lai, 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 lai. Yai, lai, lai, yai, lai, lai, lai. Yai, lai, 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 lai. Yai, lai, 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 yai, lai.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzeh or uvorei choshech, osei shalom uvorei et hakol, hakol yeducha v'hakol yishabechucha, v'hakol yomru ein kadosh kadonai, ha'me'ir le'olam kulo yoshvav, u'v'tuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishit, ma'arabu ma'asecha Adonai, kulam b'chochma asita, melech ha'aretz kinyanecha, ha'melech hamromam levado me'az, המשובח והמפואר והמתנשא ממות עולם. אלוהי עולם, ברחמך הרבים רחם עלינו. אדונו זינו צור משגבנו, מגן אישנו משגב בעדנו. אור חדש על ציון תאר, ונזכה כולנו מהרה לאורו. ברוך אתה אדוני, יוצא המאורות. אהבה רבה אהבתנו אדוני אלוהינו, חמלה גדולה ויתרה חמלת עלינו. Avinu Malkeinu, Ba'avor Shimcha Hagadol, Uva'avor Avotenu Shabbat Chuvach, V'atlamdeim Chukei Chaim, La'asot Rotzoncha B'levav Shalem, Ken Tuchonenu. Ahenenu B'toratecha, V'dabek Libeinu B'mitzvotecha, V'yachen Levaveinu, Leah ליהבה וליראה את שמך. העננו בתורתך ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך. ויחל לבבינו ליהבה וליראה את שמך. למען לא נבוש ולא ניכלם, כי אל פועל ישועות אתה. העננו בתורתך ודבק ליבנו במצוותיך. ויחל לבבינו ליהבה וליראה את שמך. ובאנו וחצת מכל עם ולשון, וקראתנו מלכנו לשמך הגדול באהבה, להודות לך ולייחדך ולהבא את שמך. ברוך אתה אדוני, הבוחר בעמו ישראל באהבה. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך. והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושננתם לבניך ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. ויאמר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת להם, ועשו להם ציצית על כנפי בגדיהם לדורותם, ונתנו על ציצית הכנף פתיל תכלת. והיה לכם לציצית, וראיתם אותו, וזכרתם את כל מצוות אדוני, ועשיתם אותם. ולא תתורו אחרי לבבכם ואחרי עיניכם, אשר אתם זונים אחריהם. למען תזכרו, ועשיתם את כל מצוותי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. We're on page 217. אמת ויציב וקם מקובל, וטוב הדבר הזה עלינו לעולם ועד. אמת אלוהי עולם מלכנו, צור יעקב מגן אישנו, לדור ודור הוא קיים, ומלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת. אמת, שאתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו, פודנו ומצילנו מעולם הוא שמך, אין אלוהים זולתך. עזרת אבותינו אתה הוא מעולם, מגן ומושיע להם ולבניהם אחריהם בכל דור ודור. אשרי איש שישמע למצוותיך, ותורתך ודברך ישים על ליבו. אמת, אתה הוא ראשון ואתה הוא אחרון, ומבלעדיך אין לנו מלך, גואל ומושיע. ממצרים גאלתנו אדוני אלוהינו, ומבית עבדים פדיתנו. משה ומרים ובני ישראל, לך אנו שירה בשמחה רבה, ואמרו כולם.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא, נורא תהילות עושה פלא. שירה חדשה שיבחו גאולים, ושמחה על שפת הים, יחד כולם הודו והמליכו ואמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד.
צור ישראל, קומה בעזרת ישראל, גואלנו אדוני צבאות שמו קדוש ישראל, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל Yisrael. We rise together for the Amidah on page 222.
Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagi Teilatecha, Ufi Yagi Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Adonai Sfatai Tiftach, Ufi Yagid Teilatecha, Ufi Yagid Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Elohei Emotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor Hanora El Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim Koneh HaKol V'zocher Chasdei Havot V'imahot V'mevii Goel Livnei B'neihem L'mahan Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozeh Moshiach Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Poked Sarah אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, בחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע, מוריד אתה, מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים, תומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמנת להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Jumping to page 227. Moses rejoiced at the gift of his destiny, for you called him a faithful servant. You set a radiance about his head when he stood before you on Mount Sinai, bringing down in his hand the 2 tablets of stone on which is written the Shabbat command. And so it is written in your Torah.
ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות, את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות, את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות, את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת לעשות, את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, לדורותם ברית עולם.
We're going to continue with the Amidah for ourselves, coming together for Yehiyu Ratzon.
Ratzon imrefi legion libi lefanecha Adonai Tzuri v'gali v'gali Yehu l'ratzon imrefi legion libi lefanecha Adonai Tzuri v'gali v'gali
May the one who makes peace in the highest bring this peace upon us, upon all Israel, and upon all the world. Amen.
Amen.
Our Torah service, once again, is slightly abridged. In order to join with our Torah service, there is a special supplement on which you will find the Torah portion and the Haftarah, and also to begin our Torah service for this morning, the words of Av HaRachamim.
Av harachamim heitiva virtzonecha et Zion tifnei chomot Yerushalayim ki v'chalavad פתחנו מלך רם רם ונישא אדון אדון עולמים מלך רם רם ונישא אדון אדון עולמים.
Our Torah portion for this morning is taken from Parashat Chukat. We're going to be reading a section in which we see or accompany the Israelites on their journeys once again. I'm going to talk a little bit about the first part of the Torah portion in my sermon, but just to point out one feature of the second section or the second part. I'm reading it as one very long aliyah, but this bit of Torah makes reference to something called the Book of the Wars of the Eternal, Sefer Milchamot Adonai, which is interesting because it's not something that can be accounted for in any sort of clear way exactly to what this refers. And it is one of those odd features of the Torah that those who believe, as I do, that the Torah is a composite work, will point to and say, what we have here is the evidence of hundreds of years of storytelling being woven together. And here we have just a little glimpse, a little bit of kind of textual archaeology, a little moment that tells us that there was this other work that is no longer known to us, no longer extant, but which gets quoted here in our section of Torah. So, as I say, I'm going to speak about the first bit. There are three main bits of our portion. There is the story of Moses and the serpents. Then we have some more of their journeys, which includes the war of the books of the war of the Lord. And then we have a new well and the song that the Israelites sing to a new well. Our blessings for our Torah portion for this morning are going to be read for us or chanted for us by Jeanette Jonas to mark the occasion of Yahrzeit. So we call her to Torah so that she can do the blessings for us. תעמוד נעמי בת מרים ועבדולה לקריאת התורה.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
אמן. וייסעו מאור דרך ים סוף לסבוב את ארץ אדום, ותקצה נפש העם בדרך. וידבר העם באלוהים ובמשה, למה העליתונו ממצרים למות במדבר, כי אין לחם ואין מים, ונפשנו קצה בלחם הקלוקל. וישלח אדוני בעם את הנחשים השרפים, וינשכו את העם, וימות עם רב מישראל. ויבוא העם אל משה, ויאמרו חטאנו, כי דיברנו באדוני ובך. התפלל אל אדוני, ויעשה מעלינו את הנחש. והתפלל משה בעד העם. ויאמר אדוני אל משה, עשה לך שרף, ושים אותו על נס. והיה כל הנשוך, וראה אותו וחי. ויעש משה נחש נחושת, וישימהו על הנס. והיה אם נשך נחש את איש, והביט על נחש הנחושת וחי. ויסעו בני ישראל, ויחנו באובות, ויסעו מאובות, ויחנו באיי העברים, במדבר אשר על פני מואב, ממזרח השמש, משם נסעו, ויחנו בנחל זרד. משם נסעו, ויחנו מעבר ארנון אשר במדבר, יוצא מגבול האמורי. כי ארנון גבול מואב, בין מואב ובין האמורי. על כן יאמר בספר מלחמות אדוני, את והב בסופה, ואת הנחלים ארנון, והשד הנחלים, אשר נטע לשבט ונשען לגבול מואב, ומשען בערה. היא הבאר אשר אמר אדוני למשה, אסוף את העם ואתנה להם מים. אז ישיר ישראל את השירה הזאת, עלי ואנו לה חפרו השרים, קראו נדיבי העם, במחוקק במשענותם, וממדבר מתנה נחליאל, ומנחליאל במות, ומבמות הגיא אשר בשדה מואב,
Rosh HaPizgah, Benishkafa, Al Panei HaYeshimon.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu emet, Torah emet, v'chaye olam nata b'shochenu. Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah.
Amen. Having read in our Torah portion about the creation of a copper servant, which I will speak a little about in my sermon, we now turn to our Haftarah, in which the future, or what happens to that copper serpent, is revealed to us. So reading Haftarah for us this morning is Carol, also to mark Yahrzeit this Shabbat morning. Carol.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bacha b'nviim tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah u'Moshe abdo u'Yisrael amo in the 3rd year of King Hoshea, son of Elah of Israel, Hezekiah, son of King Ahaz of Judah, became king. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. His mother's name was Abiah, daughter of Zechariah. He did what was pleasing to the Eternal, just as his ancestor David had done. He abolished the shrines and smashed the pillars and cut down the sacred post. He also broke into pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made. For until that time, the Israelites had been offering sacrifices to it. It was called Nehushtan. He trusted only in the Eternal, the God of Israel. There was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those before him. He clung to the Eternal. He did not turn away from following God, but kept the commandments that the Eternal had given to Moses. And the Eternal was always with him. He was successful wherever he turned. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and would not serve him. He overran Philistia as far as Gaza and its border areas, from watchtower to fortified town. In the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of King Hoshea, son of Elah of Israel, King Shalmaneser of Assyria marched against Samaria and besieged it, and he captured it at the end of 3 years. In the 6th year of Hezekiah, which was the 9th year of King Hoshea of Israel, Samaria was captured, and the king of Assyria deported the Israelites to Assyria. He settled them in Halah, along the Habor and the river Gozan, and in the towns of Media. This happened because they did not obey the Eternal their God. They transgressed the covenant, all that Moses, the servant of the Eternal, had commanded. They did not obey, and they did not fulfill it. Al haTorah ve'al havodah ve'hanvim ve'al yom haShabbat hazeh shenatatan lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdushav limnucha lechavod u'tifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mevarachim otach yitbarach shimcha b'fi kol hay tamid le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai HaKadosh HaShabbat.
Amen. And together we wish Jeanette and Carol and all those who come to this Shabbat, marking Yahrzeit or in mourning, the traditional words of consolation. Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch sha'ah ha'avelim. May the ever-present God be a source of comfort to you, together with all those who mourn. So we turn now to page 246 of the Siddur, where we find the prayers for the community. Our God, whose dominion is everlasting, we ask you to bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth, and to guide the government of this country. Help us to be good citizens, working together for justice and peace at home and abroad. Bless this holy community and all holy communities, and support the life and work of all who labour for their welfare. Our God and God of our ancestors, we ask your blessing on the state of Israel and all who live there. Give wisdom and understanding to its leaders, and friendship and compassion to the people, so that there may be lasting peace on its borders and in its homes. Soon may your promise be fulfilled, for Torah shall come out of Zion, and the word of God from Jerusalem. We ask you to listen to our prayers and look on us kindly, supporting those who are troubled, consoling the bereaved, sending relief to those in pain or anxiety. As you blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our mothers, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless our own congregation, all other congregations gathered in prayer, and everyone who responds to the needs of the community. May such be the divine will, and let us say, Amen. And as we mark the end of our Torah service for this morning, we turn to page 256. And we're just towards the bottom of that paragraph.
Etz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomcheha meushar darchenoam v'chol netivoteha shalom, shalom. Hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. Etz Chaim hi lamachazikim ba v'chol netivotecha shalom, shalom.
Whether it is the question of where the statue of Edward Colston that was toppled and pushed into Bristol Harbour last June should end up, or the future of the statue of slave ship owner Robert Jeffrey at the now renamed Museum of the Home in East London, or anger over the removal of portraits of former governors at the Bank of England, or the legacy of Cecil Rhodes at Oxford University. One of the live issues of our time is, what do we do with artifacts from our past when they represent ideas, behaviors that no longer match our values? In a pair of stories in our Haftarah and Torah portion this morning, we encountered a not dissimilar dilemma. Our Torah portion within it contained a short narrative, just 6 verses long, in which the Israelites, not unusually, start to complain, though this time against both Moses and God. And in punishment, they encountered fiery serpents, serpents that bit the people with fatal bites. Recognizing their wrongdoing, the people entreated Moses to intercede on their behalf with God. And now it gets strange. For God's response is to instruct Moses to make the image of a serpent and mount it on a standard. Vayas Moshe nachash nechoshet, it states, and Moses made a copper serpent and mounted it on a standard. When anyone was bitten by a serpent, they would look at the copper serpent and recover. Fast forward 500 years, at least in the biblical chronology, and in our Haftarah we read about Hezekiah, the king of Judah in the late 8th century BCE. Biblically, Hezekiah was a good king. As Carol read for us, there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those before him. And among the good things that Hezekiah did in his obedience to God, we are told, V'chitat nechash hanechoshet asher asa Moshe. And he beat, the same verb as the verb used when we are beating our swords into plowshares. So he beat with hammers, maybe to turn it into something else. He beat nechash nechoshet, the very copper serpent that was made in our Torah portion, now an item with its own identity, referred to as Nehushtan. Now, a couple of observations about these texts. The first is that from very early on, rabbinic tradition flags that there is a major problem here. The Mishnah, the earliest code of Jewish law, is keen to clarify, in case we misunderstand, exactly what is happening in our Torah portion. In a halakha about the requirement for kavanah, for intent in our religious life, the Mishnah asks, V'chi nachash memit o nachash mechayeh? Is it possible that it is the serpent that kills, or the serpent that causes life? Rather, the Mishnah continues, when the Israelites turned their eyes upward and subjected their hearts to God, they were healed, but if not, they died from their wounds. It is directing the heart to heaven, the rabbis stress, that is efficacious. The 2nd century Targum Yonatan, an Aramaic translation of the biblical text, translates our difficult verse as, when a serpent had bitten someone and they looked at the serpent of copper, their heart was directed to Memrad Adonai, to the Memra, the name or manifestation of God, and thus they lived. So theologically, our story in the Torah is potentially deeply problematic. When we read it, we see that the efficacy of an image here comes perilously close to the idolatry described in our Haftarah. It is thus hugely important to the rabbis to establish that this absolutely, categorically isn't what's going on here. But, and this is observation number 2, but when we read the Bible with an eye to what else we know about ancient Near Eastern religion and culture at that time, it's hard not to conclude that what the rabbis want us not to believe is exactly what was going on here. Because we know from extra-biblical evidence that there was use of snake imagery in cultic practice in the ancient Near East. This was certainly true in ancient Egypt. Think of the uraeus, the serpent head, that would sometimes be seen portrayed on the foreheads of Egyptian gods and rulers. And it was also true in ancient Canaan. Bronze serpents have been discovered in late Bronze Age findings at a number of places in the land of Israel. It is very likely that idol worship, including snake imagery, was a part of common cultic practice in 8th and 7th century Israel, or as we know it, at the time of Hezekiah. One, in fact, perhaps the best explanation for our odd story in Torah is that we are actually reading the text the wrong way round. The best conclusion that we have when we study this material is that a snake image was being worshipped by the Israelites at the time of Hezekiah, possibly as a fertility symbol in relationship with the goddess Asherah. And the scholarly suggestion goes, the story of Moses that we read in our Torah portion and the creation of the Nachash Nechoshet emerged at that time as an etiological narrative, as an explanation, explaining how it came to be there in the first place, that our Torah portion was a story told in order to legitimize the worship of the snake that's described in our Haftarah, maybe even to save the snake from those who wished it removed. All of which brings us back to our question of statues. Because if these two observations tell us anything, it is that history, that story, can be incredibly messy. Our narratives don't always look like we want them to. They don't always say what we want them to. Sometimes, like the Targum, like the rabbis, we even want to rewrite them to say what we need them to say. Our narratives are not always straightforward. Those on both sides of the arguments about statues often seek to simplify, to ignore the complexity. The defenders often argue that they are protecting a cultural legacy. But we as Jews know one thing very clearly, which is that cultural legacies can be very, very complicated indeed. The example of the Nachash Nechoshet is that things do not always mean the same thing forever. We can't always trace a simple linear journey, nor can we fix a moment or a meaning in time. Objects can change their valence. Something can mean one thing at one time in one story and mean something else in another time in a different story, even within the Tanakh, even within the Bible. We can imagine the defenders of the serpent in the 8th century BCE arguing that it should be protected. This is a part of our history to be preserved, while those against it, Hezekiah included, would argue that its meaning, its exact meaning, its problematic meaning at the time meant that it needed to be destroyed. Now, I'm not making a case for or against the removal of any specific statue here. In this morning's Times, there was an article by Ben McIntyre on the composer Handel's links to slavery. It is an important reminder of just how complicated this conversation is, how complicated the idea of heritage can be. But I would suggest that our Torah and Haftarah portions this morning strongly suggest that we should not view any artifact, any image, as sacred or as untouchable. Longevity is certainly not a good enough argument in itself. If we accept the biblical chronology, the Nachash Nechoshet had stood for 500 years. But we are told its removal was the right thing to do by one of the greatest of all of our kings. In fact, the Talmud asks an obvious question. If getting rid of it was the right thing to do, why had the preceding good kings left the copper serpent standing? The answer it gives is that they left it so that Hezekiah should have the merit of removing it. That is, sometimes it is a generation's purpose, a generation's privilege, a generation's task to think about the artifacts that we own. And let's remember, this was an image which, if only in backstory, was created at divine instruction. A standard which saved people from the generation in the wilderness, that first generation as part of the formative story of people Israel. And yet, when its meaning shifted, our tradition understands that its removal was the right thing to do and was done by the very best of kings. I'm not in any way intending to imply that this is straightforward. If there is one thing we learn from our story, it is that it is complicated. But there is, I think, one final lesson from this very complicated story of the copper serpent. And it is a general warning to be cautious about objects. We should recognize their limitation. Ultimately, as the rabbis seek to stress to us, they are not what is really important. And as the columnist Gary Younge has observed, there is something deeply problematic in the attempt to create a fixed moment in the public domain, as he says, with eternity in mind. When societies evolve, norms change, and attitudes progress. That our story tells us. And the danger, if we ignore this truth, is that, be it copper serpents, or be it statues of Edward Colston, or of Robert Jeffrey, or of Cecil Rhodes, if we are not careful, we can end up fighting for, we can end up sanctifying things which are not really worthy of being sanctified. Shabbat Shalom. We turn together to page 310. We invite you to rise with us as we turn to the words of the Elaining.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים, ונתן לנו את תורתו, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומשב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום והשבות בלבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, והארץ מתחת אין עוד.
And on page 313, Al Cain, Nekavelecha Adonai Eloheinu, Le'rot Mehera B'Tiferet Uzecha, L'haveh Glulim Min Haaretz, V'Halilim Karot Shekreitun, L'taken Olam B'Malchut Shaddai, V'chol B'nei Vasa Yikru V'Shmecha, L'havnot Elecha Korishe Aretz, Yakiru V'Yedu Kol Yoshvei Tevel, Ki Shutafim Kulanu B'Tikun Olamecha, Ki HaMalchut Shalcha Hi, Ulol Me'ad Timloch B'Chavod, Kekatuv B'Toratecha, Adonai Imloch, Le'olam Va'ed.
ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל ארץ. ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
We turn together to page 316 and prepare to sanctify the name of God with the words of the Kaddish. As we do so, we mourn. As a community, we join with our member, Suzanne Caro, as she mourns the death of her mother, Enid Rika Melamed. And as a community, we also mourn for Alec Hassanson, who I am sad to announce died overnight last night. Alec, our friend and regular as part of the community, long-standing member, we wish comfort to everyone who is mourning for him this morning. We join too with all of those in the Shloshim and the Shana, the periods since the loss of a loved one. And we stand with those who are remembering someone this Shabbat, marking the anniversary of their death. Together with them, we remember Peter Abbey, Susan Angel, Fiona Avner, Yvonne Bakir, Alan Burton, Doris Burton, David Dale, Jonathan Davis, Alexander Gellert, Sheila Gertler, Faye Gold, Lewis Herman, Frederick Hogan, Miriam Isaac, Morris Kay, Sidney Lehman, Hans Lublina, Maureen Margolis, Lily Matthews, Justin Plain, Gordon Rose, Phyllis Scher, and Maxwell Simon. Zichronam livracha, may their memories be for a blessing. We turn to page 316, and I invite those who come to this Shabbatin morning to read with me the words of the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
Ba'alma divrah chirutei v'yamlich malchutei. B'chayechon uv'yamechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. B'gala v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'elam l'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'a v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitada v'yitalei v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol bechata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Diameran ba'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol ha'olam v'imru. Amen. In a moment, we're going to turn to page 320 to sing together Adon Olam. Before we do that, I just want to say a little bit about where we are in terms of the journey, this long, drawn-out, painful journey out of pandemic and how it affects what we can do. So we are really pleased that, as you will know from the letters that we've sent and updates, we've been doing work on the Sukkah area to extend it and to cover it so that we can use it as an outside meeting space, as some kind of inside-outside space. What that means is that over the coming weeks, we are hoping to bring back some of the core activities of the synagogue first, and then we have to be careful how we use that space. Obviously, we've got neighbors who we are going to make their lives very difficult for the next couple of years of building, so we don't want to upset them too much yet. But we are developing this amazing outside space. On Shabbat, it's becoming an outside Beit Tefillah. This morning, I had the joy of leading Tefillah for a young man's bar mitzvah in that space, and it felt like a really gorgeous spiritual space to lead Tefillah. And most importantly for us, it's a space in which we can sing together, which we couldn't do inside, and it's also a space where we can gather without wearing masks as well. And it is a space where we have a much greater capacity. So we can, by opening that space, we've now doubled our capacity for any given service. So with regard to Tefillah, what that means is that we hope we can accommodate nearly everybody who wants to come and pray in person over the course of the next 6 weeks or so. So next Shabbat morning, there will be 2 services back to back. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, Katie and I, together with Cantor Tamara and Julianne on the piano, will be leading a service using our choral repertoire. And then that will finish at 10:30. We'll turn the space round. I will have a glass of water. And we will then, at 11 o'clock, have an Imre Finu service with the guitar. And that will be with me. So there are these two services. What that means is that 65 people can pray in person together next Shabbat morning, which we're very excited about. In order to join us, you need to pre-book. You need to go online, go to the website or to the weekly email and click through and pre-book. There are spaces available, and we really look forward to being able to pray together in person. Until we can all be together, and until everyone feels comfortable coming together, and we recognize that there are plenty of people who are not there yet, and plenty of our members, about a third of our membership, is yet to be offered the vaccine. So until that point, obviously, we will continue to also have a dedicated online service in here, and the services from our new outside Beit Tefillah are also joinable over Zoom as well. So they're hybrid services. So we are working really hard to be able to get back together in person. Your task is to log on and click and sign up and then come and join us and pray with us in person because we'd love to do that with you if you feel comfortable doing so. We're going to turn to page 320. And Katie, who I'm thrilled and delighted to have been able to lead with this morning, is going to lead us in Adon Olam.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra leit nasa kechefso ko azai melech shemo nikra ואחרי ככלות הכל לבדו ימלוך נורא והוא היה והוא הווה והוא יהיה בתפארה והוא אחד ואין שני להמשילו להכבירה בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמזרם, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, וצור חבלי ביום צרה, והוא ניסי ומנוסי, מנת קוצי ביום אקרא, בידו אבקיד רוחי ביתי שם בעירה ואמרוכי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא אירא.
If you have Kiddush, I invite you to join with me. We're on page 454. Before we do that, a special thank you for this morning to Sam, who has been on tech, who had to cope with Zoom deciding to unilaterally decide that we didn't need to hear one another, and the panic that she had to cope with as we managed to get back together. Thank you, Sam, for being with us. A huge thank you to her and Adam, who are the rocks on which this whole operation is being founded. We're on page 454. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. זכור את יום השבת לקדשו. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם בורא פרי הגפן. Chaim. So as ever, we are going to unmute you, give you the opportunity to speak with one another for a little while. From Katie, from me, from Sam, we wish you Shabbat Shalom. If you feel comfortable doing so, please do sign up for one of our in-person services. It would be lovely to see you, not through a screen, but if you don't feel comfortable doing so, obviously we will still be here every Shabbat morning at 10:30. For today, though, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Together,
Shabbat Shalom.
Gideon,
Shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
Happy memories.
Shabbat
Happy
Shalom,
memories,
Shabbat Shalom,
Andrew.
Gideon.
Friday.